Hello students, this is Dr. ABUGA ISSAC, going to take you the subject Economics of Public Finance. Previously, we had covered a number of units on public finance, and we introduced the subject by saying that public finance is concerned about the revenues and expenditure of public authorities. And when we talk about the public authorities, we are talking about the state. Regardless whether the government is a devolution government, which can have the state, the counties, as well as the sub-counties and etc., or we are having one state. But we are concerned about the revenues and expenditure of these public authorities. Now, these public authorities arises mainly because the private sector itself is not able to manage the resources. So you find that the decision of allocation of resources is not done efficiently so that the market can be efficient. And you remember in the previous lessons when we were talking about the public finance, we say that the economic systems, they started from the capitalist system. And the capitalist system, they believe on the private property, whereby the decisions of what to produce, how to produce it, and where to produce it is decided by the public authorities. And since it was on a capitalist system, it was expected that everything within the market is supposed to readjust itself so that whatever which is required with the market is also demanded, so that we have what we call as the balance. But unfortunately, we find that this particular market is not able to balance. It is inefficient. Why? Because all the assumptions of having a market system are not working. One of it is whereby we are assuming that there is perfect knowledge about the market. We are assuming that there is large number of buyers and sellers who are supposed to provide available resources. We are assuming that the price is supposed to be uniform and etc. But unfortunately, either the buyer or the seller has some deficiencies in terms of knowledge, or you find that the resources which are there is inadequate, and for that reason, we have what we call price distortion. Now, when we talked about the price distortion, we meant that in this particular market, the price which is paid, or the price which the seller is selling, is not what is the product which is being transacted. And for that reason, there was need that we need to have the public or the government to intervene. So when we are talking about the public finance or the economics of public finance, actually we are referring to economics of public finance because public finance itself as a subject, it's a branch of economics. Economics dealing about the resources, and public finance is about how to manage the resources under the government. Now, today, we are going to deal with the remaining topics which we had not covered before. And the topics which we are dealing with now here is the topics related with optimal taxation, because we say that public finance has key important topics. That is, we have public revenue and we have public expenditure. Of course, for the sake of understanding, we also say that we have public debt. But in the government system, when we are trying to analyze the public revenue, also public debt is considered to be a branch of revenue. When the government says that we are going to raise revenue, they say we are going to raise from taxes and non-taxes as well as the borrowing. So public debt is part of revenue, but sometimes we discuss it separately. So here we have 4 key topics which we are summarizing. One is the optimal taxation. The next one is the taxable capacity, as well as public expenditure and public debt. To start with, the optimal taxation. As I said, taxation being one of the key sources of public revenue. Of course, we have other non-tax sources, but tax comprises a big component. And in the previous unit, we had already covered what what tax is. It's only to try to remind you that when we are talking about optimal taxation, it's part of the public revenue, where we say that public revenue includes all the income and receipts which the government happens to get during any period of time. That's according to Dalton. Income and receipts. All the incomes comes from taxes and receipts comes from non-taxes, like when the government receives fees, when it receives money from their enterprises, that is public enterprises and etc. All those ones comes part of the revenues of the government. And the key component in that revenue is the tax, and that's why we are trying to define what a tax is, of which we say that a tax is a compulsory levy, and those who are taxed have to pay the sums irrespective of corresponding return of services or goods by the government. The key component there when we are defining tax is a compulsory levy, and another important thing is that there is no equivalent corresponding return. Or somewhere they say that there is no quid pro quo. When you pay taxes of 100 shillings, you are not expecting the government also to pay you back 100 shillings. But it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that this particular government is supposed to take all your money without accounting for it. They are supposed to account. One of the principles of maximum social advantage in public finance requires that the cost should be equal with the benefit. The cost should be equal with the benefit, in the sense that the amount of tax we pay should be equal to the benefit we are receiving from the government for an economy to be able to grow. So if it's not growing, either the taxes are not adequate compared with the benefit we receive, or the taxes are more than the benefit we receive. And that's why you find the economy is not moving. So we are saying that it is compulsory. When you don't pay tax, regardless of the reason you have, it's a crime. And that's why we are saying that it's a compulsory levy. Now, in the tax system, of course, there's somewhere in our lecture we say that there are some principles governing taxation. Like we say that there is equity, there is economy, there is conveniency, which are very important in taxation, that the tax should be able to be taxed according to the ability of the person. That's why we say the principle of economy. Then we say that there is principle of convenience, where the tax is supposed to be taxed at the time which is convenient, or which is easier for the taxpayer to be able to pay. Of course, we also say that tax system should follow the principle of economy, in the sense that the cost of collecting that particular tax should be minimal. That was very important about the tax system. So when the tax system fails to adhere to those particular principles, then it fails to achieve its objective of collecting enough revenue, which is enough to fund the government. And the key concept we have here, which governs the tax system, it is this optimal taxation, of which it's defined as, optimal taxation is defined as a tax system which establishes the relationship between equity and efficiency in taxation. That is, it must be able to achieve those two key elements for it to be a good tax system. And you remember well when we talk about the optimal, there is also maximum. A maximum tax system is whereby you are being taxed as much as we are able. I mean the government is able to get the money out of it. And when we say that optimal, it means that is the right amount we are required to pay. And this right amount we are required to pay as a tax is defined in terms of equity and efficiency. Equity itself, we are looking about the fairness of the tax system. Is the tax fair to all different cadres of the population? Now, under the equity system, of course, we have what we call as horizontal equity, and we have the vertical equity. Horizontal equity is whereby all those people who are sharing the similar positions, they are supposed to be taxed equally. And vertical equity, it requires that all those people who are of different positions, they are supposed to be, that is, we are taxing the same tax for all for people of different positions. Now here the optimal tax system says that a tax will be considered to be optimal if that particular tax is able to achieve that element of equity or fairness. And fairness here, they measure it in terms of the amount which the person is paying, whereby it's expected that the last shilling a person pays should be able to give the same, or should be able to give the same pay for everyone. Of course, a rich person, when he's paying 1 million, and a poor person, when he's paying 100 shillings, they may have the same pay. So if the tax system can ensure that a rich person what he pays and a poor person what he pays, both they feel the same pinch, then we say that that particular tax has achieved that element of equity. And the next element is efficiency. Now, efficiency here, it is about the cost of collecting the tax, of which requires that the tax system should be able to achieve efficiency or the minimal cost of collecting the tax system. Once that tax system achieves those two elements, then we say that that particular tax is optimal. Of course, any tax which is able to achieve the optimal tax system is when the tax is being imposed on the basis of the ability to pay. You know, in economics, we measure the ability to pay in terms of the amount of the money the person has. So if you have more money, you pay more tax. If you have less money, you pay less tax. That's when it can be able to achieve that optimal tax system. Then a very key component in the tax system is the taxable capacity. When we talk about the taxable capacity, the first question which comes to our mind is, how much are people willing to pay, or how much they can afford to pay? Yeah, that is the right communication you can make. How much a person can afford to pay. And that's what we're referring as the taxable capacity, which we define as the maximum amount which the citizen can pay to the public authorities without having a really unhappy and downtrodden existence, and without dislocating the economic organization too much. That is according to Professor Dalton. That is, in short, they say, is the difference between the production and consumption, which is the surplus. A person cannot pay the tax if he's not able to generate the surplus. A simple example we can give is that, for example, if you have a cow which you are milking, of course you need milk today, you need milk tomorrow, you need milk day after tomorrow, and etc. So what you have to do is to ensure that this cow you are milking, it is in good condition so that it can give you milk today and tomorrow and etc. Now, the same case when the government is taxing the public, it has to ensure that it is based on that taxable capacity. How much can they be able to afford? And how much they can afford is when they are able to pay without affecting their normal life. That's why you find that most of the taxes, they are being collected after the produce. For example, if it is sales, it's after you sell, that's when we tax. We take part of that sales from your profit. If it is rent, it is being taxed after people have paid. They don't tax when they have not paid. Payee, after you have received income, that's when we take some part. But the condition here is that when we are taking that part of your income, we ensure that as much as we are taking, we are not going to affect your normal business. If, for example, it's myself who is lecturing, I should be able to enjoy my work, I should be able to enjoy my earning as much as we are taking the tax. The same way the business person should be able to pay the tax, at the same time should be able to enjoy his or her business. That's what is expected. Now, when the tax itself goes beyond the capacity to pay, then it affects the normal functioning of that particular entity or the person who is paying, if it's an income tax. That's why here we have said that the taxable capacity equals the total production minus the total consumption. In short, is the surplus. Of course, some of you might say that, for example, is it possible for someone to get a surplus? People get surplus. And in economics, the surplus, when you talk about the surplus, is when we deduct the cost from what? Yeah, when we are able to deduct how much we have spent and how much we have earned. In this case, we are talking about how much we have and how much we need. So if what you need has been taken care of, then there is something which remains. Out of that thing which remains is what you are sharing with the government. Of course, the government is not a separate entity. The government is us. And if we don't fund it, no one is going to fund it. It's just like we have identified someone to be in charge of us. So we give him the money, he's the one who is managing the resources. That's how the government itself is formed. And if we don't give it money, then they will not be able to function. So that's why we as the taxpayers, we share with the government in terms of giving it revenue, as well as we also remain with part of that particular revenue. And that's why taxable capacity is very important in order to guide the government to know how much they can be able to tax without affecting, because this component here is very important, without having a really unhappy and downtrodden existence. You are not going to worsen someone's life or someone's business in the process of contributing, in the process of paying the tax. Now, how do we measure the taxable capacity? There is a number of factors which are used to measure the taxable capacity. One, which is very key, is the income and wealth of the person. Of course, when your income is higher, or when you have more wealth, you know, there's a way we try to separate the wealth and the income. Income, we normally take it in terms of money. But now when it comes to wealth, wealth is end resource which has money value, which can be resold and you get money. That is your wealth. The building which you have, if you have an estate, if you have cars, if you have what, those things are wealth, because at any point of time you can decide to sell it in order for you to be able to make money. That's why we are saying income and wealth. Of course, all in all, both their income, but wealth sometimes is not measured in terms of that. But it is income which is in terms of the assets. Now, the more income you have, the more taxable capacity you have. The size of the population. From the concept which we have talked about, we have said that taxable capacity is production minus consumption. Now, if you have bigger population, it means that your consumption is going to be more. And if the consumption is more, then the difference between production and consumption will be very minimal. So the surplus will be less. In short, we are saying is that the higher the population, the lesser the taxable capacity. Of course, the smaller the population, the higher the taxable capacity. Of course, religion also has different arguments. For example, the Muslim, they might say, it is God who provides. You can have a big family and you are able to pay more taxes. You can have a small family and you are not able to pay the tax. But from economic point of view, we are looking at this particular population and we are saying that this population, they are consuming. Every person who comes to the earth is coming with the mouth. So it's going to consume. So the more they are consuming, the more they are reducing the surplus. And the more it becomes difficult for someone to be able to pay. We have people's standard of living, Of course, if you are living the highest standard, the standard of living we talk about, the number of items or things which you are able to make use of, which improves. For example, having a good house, being in a good school, be able to access good health and what, all those ones, they measure the standard of living. Of course, the higher the standard of living, the better. The psychology, the nature of the public expenditure, the nature of the public expenditure we are talking about here is that if the government is spending more on consumption, then the taxable capacity will be less. But if it's spending more money on assets or in development expenditure, the taxable capacity will be high. The psychology of the taxpayer also matters. People can have money, but if they are not willing to pay tax, it becomes a problem. The more they are willing, the more taxes they have to pay. And of course, the pace of economic growth, the faster the economy grows, the more the production, the higher the taxable capacity. The trade cycle phases. A trade cycle is when the business fluctuates. There is a time of good harvest or boom, there is time of depression. Depression, the taxable capacity is low compared with during the time of boom when the taxable capacity is high. And political conditions. We expect that if there is stability in the country, then the people are able to do business and the taxable capacity is high. So we have public expenditure, which we say is that it's the expenditure incurred for public authorities like the central, state, as well as the local government to satisfy the collective needs. Government spends for two reasons. One, to provide welfare services. Two, to protect us. So in terms of providing defense and maintaining law and order. So for that reason, the government has the expenditure which they divide into two, and in some cases they can be divided in different ways, but most countries they subdivide it into current and development, where current is expenditure for day-to-day activities, and we have capital whereby the government spends that money for investment which are able to generate more wealth. We have two theories which are explaining about public expenditure. We have Wegener's law, and we have the Weissman and Peacock's hypothesis. Wegener's law tries to say is that the public expenditure increases mainly because of the increase in the activities of the government. Since the government is now a welfare government, it has provided extra services like education, health, and etc. For that reason, the expenditure increases. Weissman and Peacock hypothesis try to explain that the public expenditure increases mainly because of some disturbances which are caused in the operation of the government. For example, if we have a calamity, the government has to spend more than what they were spending before. So because of those disturbances, that's why the expenditure increases. Of course, public expenditure affects three key areas. One is production, distribution, and stabilization. Production, when the government spends money for producing goods and services, it contributes a lot in terms of increasing the economic growth. Distribution, when the government, through the taxes which are being generated, can be able to supply, we have cash transfers, we have subsidies, and etc. It impacts the economy, as well as stabilizing in terms of controlling inflation and deflation. Then we have the public debt, which we say is that it is how much a country owes to lenders outside of itself, of which when the government is not able to generate enough revenue to meet the expenditure, it can borrow either from inside, which you say domestic borrowing, or outside, which we say international or external debt. Now, why do we borrow? There are two reasons why the government borrows. One is the scarcity of resources. We are not having enough resources in order to meet our needs. And for that reason, we have to seek for more money. Of course, they say that we have more resources which are unutilized, and for that reason, we need some more money to invest in exploiting those resources. Two, government borrows because our exports are not enough to meet our imports. So we tend to import more than what we are exporting. So we lack enough foreign exchange for paying our imports, and for that reason we borrow. Now, this public debt can be classified as domestic. It can be classified either domestic and external, or bilateral, multilateral, productive, unproductive, redeemed, and non-redeemed. Domestic if it's from within, and external from outside. Or we can say bilateral if it is arrangements between two countries. Multilateral is the manner which we borrow from international agencies like IMF, World Bank, and etc. We have productive if it's used for productive purposes, for producing goods and services. And productive if you have borrowed money in order to, for example, to wage for war, it's unproductive. Redeemed and unredeemed. Redeemed is the money which is borrowed, which is expected to be repaid. And non-redeemable, it means that it is borrowed and it may not be repaid. So how do we measure the burden of that debt? The burden of debt can be measured in three ways. By head of the population, to see if at all we have to pay, how much an individual is required to pay. So the more the per head amount of debt to pay, the more the burden is. The same way we measure the percentage of public debt as a percentage of government revenue, of which we look about how much of revenue which has to be sacrificed in order to pay the debt, as well as the percentage of national income, how much of our GDP which is being shared in order to pay the debt. And conventionally, the borrowing should not exceed, you know, it was 50%, but now it's around 65%. The borrowing should not exceed 65% of the total GDP. Now, also when we are borrowed, we are supposed to repay. There is redemption of the public debt, which means the payment of interest and payment of principal by the government. And we have the methods of doing that is we redeem or we pay the debt out of the revenues, or we have sinking fund, the money which the government had already saved or put aside, or we can use bonds like the Euro bond in order to raise some extra funds in order to clear other debts, or from lottery method or debt conversions. Of course, lottery is not popular here, but in developed countries, it really works well in repaying the debt. So the techniques of debt management, we can manage the debt by lowering the interest rates, changing the maturity structure. That is, if it was to take 10 years, we can extend it to 20 years. We can advance refunding, whereby we are paying before the actual maturity period, or coordination of monetary and the fiscal policies. And the role of public debt is expected to generate capital. We borrow in order to increase our production capacity, as well as to manage our inflation, if, for example, the prices have gone high, as well as to encourage compulsory savings so that we don't tax our people that much. So that is what we are talking about here when we are talking about the public finance. When we are talking about that one is that when the government spends, when the government borrows, when the government taxes, all of it has to be balanced in order to ensure that all those functions are used in order to achieve the economic growth. Thank you very much for your attention.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.